folks. It's Julius again on the Daily. Strap in for this one. Doing Caesar. I have a hell of a lot to say on this motherfucker. For all I took his name. Caesar, a study in the mental health of a conqueror. A quote from Zeno of Citrum: "A man conquers the world by conquering himself." Introduction. Forgotten by Facebook and neutered by Netflix, the ancient writings of Rome still manage to cast a shadow of a silhouette on the discussion of philosophy, warfare, political arrangements, and morality of the modern world. Encased in thousands of translations and shielded by tens of thousands of particles of dust lie the clear reasoning and beautiful language of some of the greatest minds ever carved from a star. These thoughts shine out for all of posterity to benefit from at almost no cost save for a little time and a paper cut or two. Should the wayward scholar bend a page, should the self-educated seek to satiate their strong curiosities, then amongst the world of the ancient leaders they could unpack the brilliant secrets of handling conflict. This ever-important life skill is shrouded from most educations today. Handling conflict is a skill of thought that draws from creativity, patience, intelligence, and study skills. Should you take to this indomitable art, you would profit immensely and begin to learn to manage conflict between individuals in governance, on the battlefield, and in love. If you went to a boarding school, or were of a royal education before the 80s, and as far back as the 1st century, then early on in your career you would have been required to have a working knowledge of a small novel called The Conquest of Gaul. This novel has been the premier textbook on warfare for the West. It's comparable to The Art of War in the East for its impact on the organized thoughts of military strategists. Gaius Julius Caesar, then consul of Rome, dictates his 8-year campaign in this small novel. He records his movements against the 3 major tribes of Central Europe to his friends and countrymen back home in Italy. It is not only this text, but its subsequent journalisms found in the Civil War, and mainly the Alexandrian War, that will be discussed with you here in this essay. We will use these texts and many more to sift the various layers of Julius Caesar's genius and call his sanity into question at the later portions of his life. Conflict is an inescapable vortex. You will find yourself battling for resources to hold the hand of a lover. You will be in possession of a thing that to hold the hand of a lover, you will be in possession of a thing that only one may hold. All that is needed to make enemies is to be in a contest over anything that cannot be shared. Remember this. It is not the perfection of character, reputation, morality, or equity that will hold you above the drowning torrents of fiends. It is intellect, study, wisdom, philosophy, and knowledge of the fight itself. In our modern world of easy offense and man buns, our language has changed, and these tips may be housed under the blanket term of positive mental health. Coffee in the morning, a long run, the company of friends, a decent lunch, and some afternoon tea. This is your recipe for positive mental health? Just think positive thoughts. Reflect on your thought patterns. Be sure to make time for something fun. Spend time outside. An endless gorge of papier-mâché careers housed in rented outlets of any given strip mall is sculpted from little more than these pre-rendered thoughts. Yoga trainers, a foam mat away from gigolos, smile incandescently as they repeat these pocket phrases for the 3rd time today. What will you do when your best is not enough? Will your positive thoughts hold the line when you fail time and time again? When the love of your life leaves, when the wolves sniff out your lies, and with lust on their breath bound down the path of your destruction? When enemies are at arms against you for little more than that you are from a certain family or speak a certain way, how will your lunch taste then? When destruction is the pastime of the bored, and the future is but a boot stomping on the human face forever, will the tea be strong enough? Will the trail be long enough? Will shuffle on your playlist save you a dismal hour or a blackened year? They will not. You must fight, and keep on fighting. Do not shy away from conflict. There are no prizes in life for cowards. When the time comes, you must be ready to ask your heart and nerve and sinew to serve their term long after they are done. Kipling. There will only be one way to do this, and that is to have been preparing for for it from the beginning. Who would Caesar be if he had flinched from adversity? Julius was outnumbered 10-1 in Gaul. He was a populist in a conservative government. He never shied away from a fight. The conflict in his life was the chisel that created this marble bust, this shattered visage whose wrinkled sneer and lips of cold command peer from the depths of faded textbooks and backlit museums into the Plato hearts and screen-blind eyes of modern humankind. The sculpture of Gaius Julius seems to call forward in time with a single thought written on this lifeless thing. Ozymandias reference. Are you worthy? It's all that the stone can speak to passers-by who flinch and look away. In this essay, we will examine Caesar's mental faculties and skills as he comes to possess them. The first section will give a simplified overview of his life and look at Roman Republic politics as well as give praise for the way Caesar overcomes adversity and outwits his enemies. We can call this first part Caesar's positive mental health. The second section will be scrutinizing his character and morality. It will work as a recap of the events of Caesar's life previously dictated, with some omissions, and the reader should have a basic understanding of the timeline of his career as a conqueror. We will call this section Caesar's negative mental health. Lastly, we must call upon all our collected evidence to ask a new question that few historians have dared to ask. Did Caesar ever go mad? That is to say, did events in his life and the world around him ever surmount his proper reasoning skills and overwhelm his core values? Let's dig into our best-known texts surrounding this titan and examine this new angle on an ancient story. Section 1, Reasons for Caesar's positive mental health. How intelligent was Caesar? If here it has been proposed that Caesar is the man superior to a generation that counts into the billions, then what sort of thoughts made him so? Let's take a deep dive into the forgotten literature of his contemporaries first, and hear for ourselves the things said about him in Suetonius' Lives of the 12 Caesars. We can excavate a youth roguelike and political. His ideas formed from deep thought and a sense of right and wrong. He comprehended the errors of his government and moved against them. His life in peril for resisting the will of the then dictator Sulla, he had to move from place to place every night to avoid death. His crime, staying true to his wife, whom Sulla ordered him to divorce. Cotta, amongst others, obtained for him a pardon, whilst he roved the countryside in exile. When Sulla conceded to his pardon, he warned Cotta and other intercessors of the ruling class, "Have your way and take him, but bear this in mind. The man you are so eager to save will one day be the ruin of the nobles, whose side you have upheld with me. For in this, Caesar, there is more than one Martus." Marius, of course, being the leader of the People's Party. I should stop this habit. This found on page 3, paragraph 2. Here we may see that even before his military experience, Julius was known for having an urge to shape things politically. Even if it was only a rumor, it was enough of a rumor that the dictator of the time sought to quarrel with him and even to warn the upper class of his potential as a developing youth. Caesar knows what sort of world he wanted to live in and takes the initiative to change himself first and his environment second to orchestrate these changes. Continued reading in Suetonius' written history confirms this. Julius spent time in Asia in the military as a subordinate officer. Whilst aboard, he sought to further his education at Rhodes by learning oratory from Apollonius Molo. Orators were the most supreme kind of men. It was an entire profession to learn to speak publicly. This, when done well, this is the highest of human arts. For to master the art of oratory, one must master the entire collection of arts found within the human faculties. Turn with me to Cicero's De Oratory, Book 1, translated by E. W. Sutton, and in section Roman numerals XXVII. There we will find a dialogue recorded by Cicero, who is himself a political contemporary to Julius. This text itself is spoken by Antonius. This passage remarks upon Apollonius' school of oratory. Apollonius' school of oratory. I most particularly approve of the instructor Apollonius of Alabama, who, through teaching for hire, would not for all that suffer such pupils as, in his judgment, could never turn out to be orators, or waste their labor with him. Apollonius seemed to regard Julius as one fit to be an exceptional orator. If you are confused as to the qualifications and the role of an orator, in this same passage goes on to illuminate the kind and quality of work necessary for a good public speaking in those days. But an orator, we must demand the subtlety of the logician, the thoughts of a philosopher, a dictation almost poetic, a lawyer's memory, a tragedian's voice, and a bearing of the most consummate actor. Oratory includes the organization of an exceptional writer, the nerves of a warrior, full knowledge of both history and law, an impeccable understanding of human nature, and the use of common language. How poor people talk and the slang used by the youth all must be compounded with perfect timing and eloquence to inflame or quench the passions of the listening crowd. This was a sublime education. I must encourage anyone interested in the betterment of the self or of the world they inhabit to study all parts of the orator. After all, how can you hold the wolves of the world at bay if you cannot even speak with the intention and methods of captivation? Caesar would frequently rally people to his cause using these arts for the rest of his life. Caesar spent time in the study of all arts for the aim of speaking and writing to persuade. Recoil to Suetonius, page 6, and witness a young Caesar stationed in Spain, whom it is said to have walked into the garden and witnessed a statue of Alexander the Great. Upon contemplating the sculpture, Caesar let out a deep sigh, for at that age Alexander had already conquered the whole world, and Caesar felt that he had achieved no memorable acts. Alexander died at age 33. It could be speculated that Caesar at this time was around 23. The reflection motivated Caesar to withdraw from a stagnant position in Spain and to pursue his dreams of lifelong global conquest. Caesar was discontent with personal and political stagnation. Ambition and recognition was his main source of motivation. Caesar had such a command of the art of oratory that in Suetonius we can clearly see that his powers of both argumentation and persuasion were alone that which were responsible for Caesar's rise from a debt of, in the modern day, 23.5 million, adjusted for inflation, to the office of consul. How else could one raise such a campaign and soothe funds towards his own aims? It is recorded that even by speaking he was able to enrage the crowds to physically attack his opponents on more than one occasion. Vetus being one example, Caesar used the fear of the crowd and the lawful incrimination to leverage support from some and silence from others. It is time to take a break from the train of thought surrounding Caesar's mental faculties to convey a simplified version of what the government in the Roman Republic looked like, and become familiar with a few names of people who played a prominent role in Caesar's life before we encounter all this again in the summary of Julius's Acts. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the Roman Republic as, the ancient Roman state from the expulsion of the Etruscan monarchs in 509 BC until the assumption of power by Augustus Octavian in 27 BC. This is important to understanding the various conflicts of Caesar's political life and what powers and adversities it held. It has been stated twice that Julius Caesar became consul. He held other positions in religious institutions as well, as the Romans said it, including Pontifex Maximus, a role that holds sway over interpreting omens and which days are of good fortune and which ones are not. This role is kept until death. I won't hold the reader over understanding aedales, praetors, and quaestors. It is enough for you to understand that the consul was of the Roman Republic's sovereign. The consul held 6 chief responsibilities: declaring holidays, calling and banning the assembly of the Senate, and overseeing all votes and elections, writing legislation, interpreting omens, leading the entire military of the state, and vetoing any position or idea in the Republic's cabinet of authority. There is one more thing to note about consuls. 2 are elected at one time by popular vote. The 2 consuls share the seat by trading off command every month. This command was shown in symbolism by holding a bundle of sticks. These sticks were known as fasces. The consul who got the most votes took the first month of command. People knew what they meant, and they knew what it meant when Julius was elected and his co-consul Bibulus took the second month. Usually the consuls stayed out of each other's way, and this was a relatively harmonious method of distributing power. I used the word penultimate wrong, so I didn't read it. Penultimate means the one before ultimate. I didn't know that at the time. However, Bibulus hated Julius, and with exceptional reasons that we will address in section 2, this was a sort of mutually assured destruction, a fight with the other consul as both hold the power of veto and could stalemate the other into the deridements of Rome's progress as a whole. The Senate acted according to strict rules, or it was supposed to. During Caesar's life, the Senate was a shadow of the principled order of gentlemen that it was in the former years of the Republic. Things were played fast and loose, and many of the stricter rules designed to hold check against any one of the individuals gaining too much power had started to buckle under the immense size of Rome and the fierce competition, overcrowding in the city, and the vast stretch of territories being added unto the state. Occasionally, a consul would be granted to form into a form of martial law known as the final act. In Latin, that's this granted a consul the role of dictator. This was only done in times of intense conflict within the city itself, or the nation was under direct threat from an invading force. The role of dictator lasted a maximum of 6 months to keep the power in the hands of a rational committee. When Caesar was on the run of being suspected of being in the populist cabinets, Sulla was in the position of dictator consul. Here are a few names of people who have played a prominent role in Caesar's life. Pompey, a powerful and excessive ambitious ally to Caesar and part of the 3 members of a secret triumvirate. He would later turn on Julius after Crassus's death in Syria and single-handedly start a civil war. This would arguably end the Roman Republic. He was known for rigging elections by both bribery and force. Pompey steals Crassus's credit for a military campaign. Before all this, he was extremely popular with the Roman people. Crassus, part of the hidden alliance triumvirate, he was extremely rich, possibly the richest man in Rome, but Pompey and Caesar were very close to his total in wealth. Crassus chose to fund reformers as opposed to directly getting his hands dirty. Pompey steals Crassus's credit for a military campaign. He leads an unsuccessful war against the Syrians and dies as a direct result. Slaughtered in the desert, I believe. On retreat. Cicero, one-time consul. Cicero was a swing vote between reformists and conservatives. His aims were peace and stability. This frequently left him closer to the other conservatives' camps for that reason. A brilliant writer, lawyer, and orator, he used oratory to attack the characters of his opposing politicians to rise in the ranks. Once granted the role of dictator, and used his power to put a civil war to rest before it could happen by having its leaders jump into a pit with ropes around their necks without any trial. The leaders were planning Cicero's assassination, and this move stopped that possible future. Crowds followed Cicero around, praising him, wherever he went for weeks after that. Cicero would later write that this was the proudest moment of his life. Years later, Julius Caesar would use this event as leverage against Cicero by threatening to open a court case against him by questioning the legitimacy of that move. Cleopatra, an intelligent and brave woman who spoke several different languages. She had her own army and became the queen of Egypt by securing Caesar's aid at any cost against the civil war, and with her child brother and his followers. Ptolemy, at the age of 15, he was the self-proclaimed child king of Egypt. He took over the capital city of Alexandria by force and pushed out his sister Cleopatra and her army. With Caesar's help, the Child King would lose an important battle, and in a panicked retreat into the boats of the Nile, his ship would sink and he would drown, ending the Alexandrian War. Now for the cool guys. Ariovistus. When Caesar used the exodus of the Helvetii to justify his conquest of Gaul, the independent tribes attempted to unify to match the organization of the Romans. Ariovistus was the first leader of this new Gallic resistance movement. Ambiorix. After Caesar had overextended his stay in Gaul by several years, many of the tribes who allied with Caesar began to fear total annexation and eternal subservience to the Roman Republic. This led them to unify once more in a covert attempt to rebel, saying freedom or death. Ambiorix was able to eliminate an entire Roman garrison who had been left to winter without Caesar's help. He did this by using some extremely clever lies. His resistance ended when he met up with Caesar himself. However, he probably did the most damage to the Romans during the 8-year conquest, and he did it all within a few days. Vientiorix. Vercingetorix. My apologies. Vercingetorix. After an 8-year-long campaign, Caesar almost had Gaul wreathed into total submission. Vientiorix had studied the Roman battle tactics and wars and was by far the most intelligent leader of the Gallic confederation of tribes. Using Caesar's own strategies, he held out the hardest and almost won a few victories over Caesar himself. In the end, however, Caesar defeats Vientiorix at the Battle of Alesia, and by taking him prisoner, Caesar brought the Gallic wars to a close. It would be 6 years before Vientiorix would be killed publicly in Rome during a parade for Caesar's successful conquest. These parades were called triumphs, and the celebration was the biggest honor available to any one person in Rome. These triumphs served to invigorate the people of Rome with a fresh feeling of jingoism every other year or so, when a new province was annexed into the Roman Republic. Cassivenaleius. Caesar wanted to explore the mythos of a mysterious island just off the coast of Gaul. Once there, a powerful tribe of charioteers painted in blue war paints and allied by spiritual leaders known as Druids. Side note, the only record of Druids that we have in human history comes from Caesar's Gallic Wars. It became his new unknown opposition. Caesar would attack this island twice before giving it up for good. On the first attack, his presence galvanized the tribes into unification and organization behind one man, Cassivenaleius. On the second trip, Caesar would return to the fight with Cassivenaleius. In the end, Cassivenaleius would end the conflict with a peace offering and turn over some hostages. Labienus, or Labienus. This both sound sexual. Labienus, right-hand man to Caesar, left to weather out the winters in Gaul after the campaign, a very competent military leader. I have a lot to say about Labienus, but more in a creative sense than a direct essay. Mark Antony, a leader in Caesar's army who won Julius's favor by single-handedly holding a section of a wall being attacked on two fronts at the Battle of Alesia. This individual may have been the most important nail in the great coffin that was the Gallic War. Mark Antony would replace Labienus as Caesar's right-hand man. Bibulus, a fearful conservative political opponent to Caesar who lacked the imagination and intelligence to stand up to his opposition properly. An idiot, in other words. Clodius, a rabble-rouser and member of the Senate who employed street gangs and the overwhelming use of violence to align the Senate in his favor. Clodius may have been backed financially by Crassus and opposed by Pompey. His death was at the hands of Milo and his gangs on a road out of Rome. His gang took his body into the Senate house and set it on fire in a makeshift and illegal funeral pyre. This pyre burned down the Senate house, a thing Clodius had threatened to do himself when a group of senators barred his entrance in response to his overwhelming bullying and fear tactics. Swords and armies were forbidden inside the city of Rome. The Pomerium, I believe, is the the wall structure, which bars weapons. But all of Italy, or the south of Italy, I think, was off limits to soldiers for the most part, organized soldiers, or that boundary was the Rhine River. Milo, a senator who has responded to Clodius's street gangs with a street gang of his own. Milo's gangs never set fire to any building and were there to keep the citizens safe. After Caesar came to power as a consul, he had Milo exiled for using violent swords and gangs inside of Rome. I don't know if there's a reference to Catch-20, or if Catch-22's Milo is a reference to this Milo. Probably not, but interesting. Sulla, a consul granted the rank of dictator who marched his army into Rome to take it by force and kill all of his political opponents. That moment was highly illegal, and it traumatized a majority of the senators against the consolation of too much power in one person's hands. His actions would plague Julius Caesar, even unto death. Apollonius, the best teacher and founder of a selective school of orators, he saw great promise in Julius and laid the foundation for Julius' success by giving him confidence and the secrets of crowd manipulation. Cato, a prominent voice in the Senate for the conservatives, frequently using filibustering to overpower legislation he was against. He was the main backer to Bibulus and used him to combat all of Caesar's ambitions. Cotta and Sabinus, two commanders of a single Roman legion weathering in Gaul, who came to infighting upon being faced with a difficult choice without Caesar's oversight. Titus and Lucilius. I like these motherfuckers. They're Legolas and Gimli, for all intents and purposes. Tolkien's inspiration for Legolas and Gimli's warlike and rivalry-based friendship. Titus and Lucilius were extremely brave soldiers and were always trying to one-up each other during promotions and battles by making boasts and jests at the expense of the other. Just think of them killing people and being like, 1, 2, back and forth. Now let us return to the main summary and arguments at hand before being hopefully somewhat competent in the world of 60 BCE to 44 BCE. Caesar's first act as consul was a land reform bill. Caesar was a populist, after all, and in secret, he held a backroom deal with two other reformist politicians and ex-consuls, Pompey and Crassus. The deal usually ran like this: you get me elected consul this year, and I'll make you sure that you get the consulship next year. You pass my bill, and I'll pass yours. Should the two of the three members of the secret triumvirate be against any piece of legislation, then the third was expected to dissolve his position to keep track of any infighting on this secret political power machine. Very smart. If you're facing 200 opposing votes, allying 3 people together makes them more powerful than any single person on the committee. So, in private, they'd already won. Pardon my bad habits. Wrong order. I'll do better next time. Let's make sure this thing's still going. 30 minutes. About time for a shot. Caesar was an underling to Pompey, who held an undisputed genius for military campaigns in the east, Turkey to Egypt. Crassus was an underling to the ambitions of both Pompey and Julius. Caesar offered his daughter Julia to Pompey as a wife, and as an added strengthening of this covert bond. As a tribute to his two hidden supporters, Caesar's land reform brought up a lot of unused countrysides in Italy and gave it to the veterans and the urban poor with 3 kids or more. Pompey favored the veteran population, and Crassus favored the farmers. This was an attempt to redistribute wealth and unclutter the city streets. Newly written legislation needed 23 days before it could be voted on. Bibulus could have vetoed this bill at any time, being a conservative and harsh adversary to Caesar. Bibulus and Caesar were both aediles, that is, in charge of festivals and public buildings, and praetors, judges who held the power of life and death in the courts, and there can be only 8 praetors a year, and were second in command to consuls. Court rulings and capital punishment were a spectator's sport. Bibulus and Julius were both well acquainted and constant opposing forces in the government before this time, and during their terms a rivalry of childish slights snowballed into all-out hatred. During one of their collective campaigns, Julius had Bibulus secured all the funds for the joint ticket, while Caesar had only his name on the campaign, first name Julius, and then where Bibulus should have been credited Caesar. That doesn't make any sense to me, and it shouldn't to you. Aediles and praetors were an excellent way to harness the power of popularity. Doing well for the community meant a significant chance for ascension in the government. However, the population of Rome was rather evidently divided in its very ideals. There were the conservatives, the old wealth, who wanted to keep the buddy system in place and deny as much change to the constitution and laws as possible. Conservatives at this time represented a noble stance in its own right. However, the expansion of Rome was moving beyond what these currently established systems could handle. Yet holding this position was a valiant effort to keep the spirit of democracy alive and prevent power from being consolidated and permanently kept by one man. It's been said and widely regarded that Julius's generation of young individuals marked by an infernal fervor for ambition. Looking to Crassus, Pompey, and Julius as being the highest examples of this, all 3 of these men represented the Reformist Party, a radical group who felt a responsibility to change laws and establish rules to allow for the population expansions. A few notable people in the Conservative Party are Cicero, Cato, and his protege, Bibulus, who form an equally powerful sort of opposition to the Reformist triumvirate. After being in constant competition with Julius's whole political career, Bibulus took upon himself to stand against Caesar's ruling on a near constant basis, sometimes without much genuine reason on the issues at hand, and more simply out of habit of hatred. Cato and the conservative bloc reacted to Julius's growing popularity and inevitable ascension to the highest position in governance by throwing all their weight into Bibulus, in order to balance out the threat of dramatic change at the nation at Caesar's hand. It worked. Both men were made co-consul. They were now set to lock horns at the top of the nation, which would lead to a stalemate and effectively see the Conservative Party's agenda brought to virtual fruition for that year. Remember, the Conservatives want stagnation. This causes stagnation. In the eyes of the Roman population, there were no job distinctions between politicians, judges, and military generals. It was established that one versed in making right judgments over the appearances of things would have